Welcome to another episode of Grief Talk. Everything you want to know about grief and more. I'm your host, Fawn Solis. As an author, mentor, and bereaved mom since 2005, through guest interviews and coaching, here's where you'll always get great content that is inspiring and practical to help you heal after loss. Today's guest is Susan Lataille. Susan is a bereaved mother who lost her only child in March 2017. Today, Susan and I will be speaking about what she's learned in her grief to this point, how she helps others through writing as a healing modality, and how we can all stay inspired and motivated amidst our most painful and distressing losses that often leave us without hope and a vision for a brighter future. Okay, so welcome to the show, Susan. We have a lot to talk about today. I'm so grateful to have this time with you, so welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Okay, so audience, you'll know note from the introduction that Susan is a bereaved mom. She did lose her only child in 2017. I am honored and blessed to have Susan here because we're going to be talking about Susan's story. I'm going to let her explain as much as she or share as much as she wants to with you, audience, about that loss and what led her to what she's doing today. We're going to be jumping into talking about recognizing health issues. We're going to be talking about how people can carry on in times of debilitating loss, so inspiration and motivation. And Susan has a wonderful career helping writers learn to write and share, and has done so with, I believe it's 2 anthologies, and I think you're working on a 3rd, Susan, is that right?
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about writing as a healing modality, and then we're going to finish off with Susan's resources. So this is going to be a jam-packed episode with lots and lots of inspiration. We hope, I think Susan and I can speak for both of us, that we hope for anybody watching this or listening to this, if you have lost a child and still have a surviving child or children, that would be me. And so to acknowledge with the candle I have going and in both our hearts, I'm acknowledging Susan's son who passed in 2017 and my daughter Janaea who passed in 2005. And I like to think our kids are with us, Susan. And and if you are a bereaved parent and have lost your only child, that is Susan's experience, and she can speak to things that I cannot. So Susan, I would love for you to share as much as you would like to share about your loss, your child, your only son, and how that kind of led you to where you are doing the work you are today.
Thank you so much. First, even when I was writing my story, I always wondered where to start. And because what I realized was it was really our story. It wasn't just my story. It was ours because it was so intertwined that he struggled a lot through his life, through being a baby with colic, through having ADHD as a young child. And through that whole time, we created a very special bond, as most mothers and sons do, or moms and daughters as well. Mm-hmm. And his father and I were divorced at a early age. He was only 2.5. So we always had that missing of one parent. Because when he was with me, he missed being with his father. When he was with his father, he missed being with me. So he always had this unsettling feeling about him that his family was broken, that his father was in the military and he lived, in Virginia for a while, then settled in Michigan once he retired. So Nathan, my son, would be constantly traveling back and forth during school vacations, during holidays, and what have you, whichever special, celebrations and things like that. So along his journey, he did a lot in a short life. He really experienced a lot, where he had the opportunity to be an only child with me. Mm-hmm. And then he was able to be part of a family of 4 with 3 other children with his dad's family, because he remarried and she had a daughter. They had another cousin that lived with them, and he ended up having he had a stepsister and a half brother there. So being, the dynamics for him, he got to experience what that was like, being in both places.
How old was Nathan when he passed?
He was 28.
What's really interesting, I'm going to let you continue, but I just want to pop in because I was a single mother of my daughter for 7 years, and she struggled. She was 22 when she took her life. But you know what? I found out after kind of that she struggled with this sense of feeling of abandoned by her father. And, we just couldn't make it work. And so I had a little guilt about not being able to reassure her and not really fully understanding how the impact of, say, divorce, just an absent parent, it can take its toll on our children.
Absolutely.
But we can't take responsibility for that, can we, Susan? Did you feel guilty about that when Nathan passed?
No. And the reason I didn't feel guilty about it in the end was because the most important thing for him was to bring his families together. And because of his illness and because of his passing, he did exactly that. We were there. We came together as two families and supported each other because of him.
What a gift.
Yes. Yes. So I did not feel guilty in that instant because he accomplished that goal.
No kidding. I think, you said at the beginning that he accomplished so much in his short life. And I am going to agree. And I might be stepping, a little bit off the, diving board here, saying this in very general terms. But you often hear that our children have been our teachers in the short time they've been here. And that they're wise souls. And, and I felt that way too. I really feel, and I never struggled with this, but that my daughter had completed what she needed to do, and she took a different exit. And so no matter how our kids leave us, you'll often, meet about parents who feel this, meet real parents, and we have such praise for the grace that in the lives of our children that they demonstrated, sometimes wiser beyond their years, that they didn't fit in, things like that. So I think, I've even read that about people who have lost really young children, and they've left such an impact. So you just saying he brought you together, it might not have been the way you wanted, but job well done, Nathan.
Right, exactly. And it's funny because you mentioned, how our children teach us so much more. I actually said that at his celebration of life, where, we think that we bring our children into this life to teach them everything we know. And in the end, it's really us that learns from them.
Yes.
And it made such an impact that his father repeated those same words when he did his own celebration in Michigan for him. I'm like, oh, what an honor you're using my words.
But no animosity, Susan.
No, I know, but it really, it felt that, I felt like that obviously hit home with him.
And I'll just speak again with absolute respect for your situation of losing your only child. But for me, I do have a surviving child. He was 13 when his sister died. It completely changed my parenting style. For years, I grappled, because mine was a suicide, that I was a really, really bad parent. But I just want to share this one little thing. I reread a letter that she wrote me in 2001, 10 pages, and I reread it maybe about 4 or 6 weeks ago, and hadn't read it for years and years and years, right? And she told me I was a really good mom. And so I'm like, darn, I should have read that letter years ago. But we absorb what we need to absorb as we move through our grief, and we see things differently and feel. So you know what? I released myself from that guilt, and I went, wow, maybe I wasn't so bad after all. Anyway, so with that loss, just back to your story. Yeah.
Yeah, back to my story. So really fast forward, Even as a young adult, he wasn't somebody that was meant for college. School was a definite struggle for him. He loved to be outside. He loved to work with his hands. So he did, some landscaping jobs. He had a lot of odd jobs, but nothing really, really stuck with him. So he would come home here to Rhode Island and work the summer landscaping and then go back to Michigan in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
And he would do that consistently pretty much for years until one year he hadn't been home actually in probably 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
This was 2014. And he said, Dad's sending me home, or I don't even know how I know this, but they couldn't deal with him anymore. He was being extremely argumentative, confrontational. I mean, just they didn't know what to do with him anymore. They didn't know what was going on. So they sent him home to me.
Mm-hmm.
When he came home, I looked at him and I went, wow, what happened to you? Like I could tell his whole demeanor was different. Everything about him was just changed. He wasn't that lovable child that I remembered. He didn't want to be touched anymore. Come to find out, after a series of things happening, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Wow. They found a large mass on his brain after a small accident that he had been in. They had, brought him to the hospital because they could clearly see something was not right with him. He had had a seizure while driving. Mm-hmm. And
wow.
They had to, rush him into emergency surgery not too much after that. So my husband and I had just left for vacation. And before I left, I looked at him and I said, look, Nathan, if you're not going to do this for you, then do it for me. You have to find out what's going on with you, because I knew something was wrong.
Okay. And he agreed to that.
And obviously his subconscious, his soul, whatever you want to say,
yes,
said, okay. And he had a seizure and he got into an accident that morning.
And I just want to say right straight up with you, I totally, do all work in spiritual soul work, all of that. And so I got it. It was like, you're not going to go yourself. Here we go. And so were you grateful for that?
I was very grateful for that, especially when the surgeon told me if that tumor would have gotten any larger, it would have killed him instantly.
Wow.
Where he could have been driving, who knows? I mean, there's so many different scenarios that could have happened, and we never would have known.
Whoa. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, if he would have just, been on the highway doing 70 miles an hour, having a seizure,
I
car with him in it.
And maybe others too.
Yeah, it would have been, that would have been horrendous.
So I always felt that I had 2.5 extra years with him, because it could have ended very differently.
Yeah, and I'll ask you this. I don't have that type of closure, understanding why my daughter chose to leave. Nobody gets that with suicide. Does it help to know that you have the actual cause of his death? Does that help?
I think so. I think so. And part of me, certainly, in the very beginning, I had to go to gratitude. It was the only thing that kept me sane. And I would reach for anything that I could, like that, like the fact that I had 2.5 extra years with him.
Yeah.
That I was able to be his caretaker, that I had my own business and I was able to be home with him and take him to doctor's appointments and everything else.
Yeah.
And I was grateful I was the only person in the hospital room when he passed and took his last breath. His last words were to me, "I love you, Mom." So all those things I was extremely grateful for. And as long as I could focus on that, I wouldn't fall to pieces.
Oh my God, Susan, that's so beautiful. That's so, so beautiful.
The only thing that kept me somewhat sane.
I started working with angels 7 months before. Just happened to start working with angels 7 months before. And I had demonstrations in my life that, okay, maybe they are kind of real. Well, you know what? They saved my life. So like you're saying, you were able to go to gratitude. You were able to find all these things. And so that kind of I'd work with them rather than, want to go to the doctor and ask for a bottle of Valium, things like that. What I'm just doing is paying a quick nod to, if we can find as bereaved parents something to hang on to in those very early hours, days, weeks, months, hopefully not years, but however long, that can give us that momentum through the trauma and through the shock. Would you agree that that's like really important?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have something positive to hold on to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think, when you start doing a lot of personal work, spiritual work, I think you especially angel work for you. I've also done, different things with angels. And I think having different beliefs, knowing that they're not gone. Like, I know that they're still here. I know I can still communicate with him when I need to.
Yeah.
Slap me upside the head and go, "What are you doing, Mom?"
Yeah. Do you enjoy visits with Nathan?
I do. I don't see him physically, although I do. And I know it's him because it sounds like him.
That, I feel, is a huge gift.
I was at a conference, and there was this woman doing a journeying. And before you went like deep and going into like it started from your moment of death. Didn't matter how you died, but from your moment of death. And before you started that journey, you had to write something down that you wanted to live for. Oh. Because you don't want to come back.
No, I know.
And when I was there, like, I knew like I couldn't go further than the place where he met me. It was like right as soon as I got there, because if I did, I would not have come back.
I know.
And we got to sit and visit and embrace. And when I came back, it was like tears were nonstop. I got
goosebumps.
It was beautiful.
Actually.
And
Nice.
I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah.
Having to come back hurt, though.
I know.
Come back and go, okay,
I know.
that was wonderful. Now back to quote reality.
Yeah. In my first years when this was happening, I was in touch daily, pretty much with one of 3 or 4 bereaved people. Most of the 2 of them were bereaved moms. One was just a sibling, suicide survivor sibling, and in and out, a couple other bereaved parents. And one in particular was just so desperate to be able to have these visits with her son, who had passed, and he was about 40, 41 when he passed from a sepsis issue. And interestingly enough, her grandchildren could see his physical presence. They were good Catholics, I just want to say. And the little grandson would say, "Mom, there's so-and-so." And she'd, what? But I would tell her, they're bittersweet, because even, at the point you're meeting and just, I was learning, my daughter visited me to teach me things from the afterlife, such as ongoing life. And when my dad was going to die, and that she wasn't alone, and just things. It was very hard waking up. That's quote unquote for audio listeners here. It took me years where I could, not have these visits be a source of comforting my pain, as opposed to, yippee, she's popped in.
Right.
And I'm there now. Yippee, she's popped in. So, but each of us has a different journey. But I just want to acknowledge that. And wouldn't you agree, Susan, that, okay, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that all of us can communicate, have some form of communication with a loved one in the afterlife or ongoing consciousness, if we allow ourselves to be open enough to these visits and then accept them as a visit?
I do. I believe that we all have that ability.
Yeah. So there's hope, audience. There's hope.
And I think it's staying open to it, to knowing that you can. And sometimes it's in different ways. A lot of ways that I used to communicate with my grandmother was through writing. Where I would write And like I would ask her a question and then I would get a response. I would write whatever the response was and we would talk back and forth.
Wow, so cool. Oh, that is
So there's many ways that you can do that, not just one way. And the only thing I have to say about that is if you think you're communicating with your loved one, believe you're communicating with your loved one.
Yeah.
Do not second guess it.
Stop guessing when it feels too weird. It was real.
Exactly.
It was real. Yeah. So you've been very, very open and shared a lot about Nathan's passing to the point you're with him in his last breaths. And it's so beautiful, just so beautiful. I just actually did an interview with a chaplain, a hospice chaplain. That's her work, palliative, terminal. And we had a lot of discussion around what is happening at the end of life. And I just want to quickly say here that she said it's crazy normal for these visits to occur the closer a patient, an individual gets to their transition. Like it happens all the time. And so they're with us and communicating even before we get there. And so there's nothing that is almost, I would say almost proof that there's ongoing consciousness. And as I did in that episode, and I'll do in this one, there are a couple books by Dr. John Lerma that he actually in Houston was a palliative physician and has documented dozens and dozens and dozens of these visits to, I don't know if he was trying to scientifically prove that they happen, but I'll put links to his site for information on that, because that really comforted me as well in the earlier years where I was still, was that a real visit? What was, I you know what I mean? So this is about visits. So they do happen, and we just have to recognize them as that, which I think you get better at them. If you don't quite trust them in the beginning, you do get better at it, right, Susan?
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. You don't doubt it as much as time goes on.
Yeah. So what were you doing in your life? I want to get into if you could explain a little bit more about the work that you are doing now. I know we talked a little bit, and you had a complete, would you say, life change after Nathan passed?
I would say yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So he passed in 2017, and I continued to do event production for several years, even though I knew it's not what I wanted to be doing anymore. I wasn't quite sure, and I don't think I was quite ready to step into helping other people with grief at that time. So when the pandemic hit, that kind of allowed me to really stop and step back and go, okay, what am I doing here? And what would I like to be doing?
Mm-hmm.
So I call it floundering, for a while, because I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do or how to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
What ended up happening, I was approached to share my story in a different anthology book.
Mm-hmm.
So that was where my, healing started taking place through writing. I was healing, but this helped me in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So once I finished that, I was like, okay, what now? What do I do with this story? What do I do to continue to, help other people? This was like the first step, totally stepping out of my comfort zone, that I became a certified master grief coach. I'm like, okay, I know I want to work in the grief world. What's my next step? I didn't have to know it all. I just needed to know the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And that was becoming a certified master grief coach. I found an online certification and completed that. And then I was like, okay, now what?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to do with this? Do I want to work with people one-on-one? What do I want to do now?
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm always listening to what's being put in front of me, or, listening and seeing what's being put in front of me, I love the idea of the anthology books, because everyone got to share, a portion of their, whole story, just a small portion of their story, and it didn't become overwhelming. And that inspired me to create my own anthology series. So the first book I went to, people I knew. I'm like, this is my vision. This is my timeline. This is what we'll be doing. And reaching out to 13 people, 10 said yes. Now, these are women that a lot of them that I had known for quite a few years, who had seen me do events, and they knew if I said I was going to do it, I was going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't like letting people down or saying, no, I'm not going to do that now. And it worked out beautifully. My timeline couldn't have worked better. The group as a whole became so close that, like each book that I have is a family because we meet regularly. And now I have 2 of my own books, and a third book was just released that I worked with a breast cancer resource foundation. And I had 10 authors there that shared the story of a loved one to cancer, not necessarily breast cancer, but to cancer.
What is the your series called? You have the 2 books.
Shining a Light on Grief.
Oh yeah, and I'm going to have the link to that in the show notes. Wonderful. You know what? It reminds me of, like you said, you had your family, so you have an immediate sense of I'm not alone in this, and I think community is one of the greatest things we can, develop in our life, create in our life for healing, for those that are ready to embrace healing. I want to ask you a little bit about, so you had some health issues that you mentioned to me sort of, triggered these changes for you as well. Do you want to speak to recognizing them? You and I were just talking briefly before we started this interview, and I said it took me years to recognize and actually have my health issues diagnosed. I'm not going to lie. It took me 9 years before I got diagnosed with PTSD, and then another, 6 before I shut myself down. And I was like doing wonderful things and blah, 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 working and do part-time angel practitioner work, but go, 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 go. And a lot of people throw themselves into that type of lifestyle when they've lost, a child, when they've had another traumatic or very, very difficult loss. So this is not unusual. But what triggered you to your health issues? And I was going to ask you part 2 to that, if neither of us forget. How I'm speaking more about me. How can people recognize that what they're going through in their off could be a health issue related to their grief?
So when I was doing event production, I had a full plate, like you were just talking about. I just go, 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 go. And I knew I wasn't feeling well. I knew I was exhausted. I knew that I needed to have a better self-care regimen because at that point I would do a few things here and there, but I didn't have anything that was consistent. Not only that, but at that time, I also was self-sabotaging myself. So wine became my best friend. I know I'm not alone in this, and it put a lot of strain on my marriage. It put a lot of strain on me physically and my health and everything else, because I was drinking before he passed, and this just amped it up even more because now it was like, okay, it's 5 o'clock. I can numb. It's time for me to just be able to be numb and not have to think about anything. And that took its toll on me, as well as just being simply exhausted. I ended up having really bad headaches. I had brain fog. I couldn't focus for long. I mean, there was so many things going on with me that when COVID hit and I stopped, like I literally had to stop.
Yeah.
Like everything came crashing down on me at that point. And I had no choice but to address it.
Was that your bottom, sort of?
That was, I would say that was pretty much my bottom. That if I didn't take and start doing something at that point, then, I was looking at, much more serious diagnosis. Because I know when you don't deal with your grief, it's going to manifest itself physically.
Oh, absolutely. And so I just want to stop for a second and have both of us just honor and respect in other people. It is not easy to face the pain of your grief. Oh, none of us want to do that. And self-sabotaging can happen in many, many ways. Just keeping yourself like an A++, remember when they used to say Energizer Bunny? And never stopping, disengaging from yourself, your relationships. I don't know. It could be any number of things. In my case, I worked myself to the bone. So I self-sabotaged in a way that I just wouldn't stop. I kept helping others and also working and commuting and writing a book. And I was continually ill, nothing serious, but enough I was off work 2 weeks. I would take 6 weeks to sort of recover, feel great for maybe 3 of them, and then boom, hit again. At that time, I was working for the government in Canada, and I had accommodations from 2010 to 2015 when I finally couldn't get out of bed. They gave me some kind of work accommodation every one of those years. So bless them. But I didn't know what was wrong with me. You know what I mean? And the disability, I went on a long-term disability for just over 2 years. And that was the game changer where I literally changed my life. It also, I want to speak about timing a bit here, because for you, the timing, COVID hit, and all the pieces fell in place for you. For me, I had already moved to Vancouver Island. I was just approaching the age I could take early retirement from my jobs. So it just coincided in December 2017 where I could, quote, retire. And that gave me the ability to rebuild. And you know what you said when we first met? You said, what do I want to be when I grow up? And, I kind of been saying that since I was 60. And it took me kind of until sort of recently, even today, and it's still really refining my choices. And we have to do that, would you not agree, Susan, by understanding where we are physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally at all stages of our grief. What are your thoughts around that?
We continue to evolve, and if you thought a certain way about one thing 2 years ago, we're probably thinking about that same thing very differently today. When I look back along, the 6.5 years or so since my son passed, I look back and I'm like, just seeing how dysfunctional I was, and just really going through the motions of life for many years, thinking I was okay.
So we're talking about this, audience, in case you recognize these patterns in your life. So whatever part you're missing in your grief that you're disconnected from, it could be emotional. It could be the physical part of it. Like, wow, this really hurts. I had my head in the clouds for 10 years in that spirit, in that world that was so safe. And the pain doesn't really exist in that world. Not for me. Do you know what I mean? Everything's perfect. And so when I decided, okay, I'm going to live with this, I'm going to live with what it feels like to have PTSD. And what if I didn't have that world? And what if I was only relying on the human experience to get through this? Doctors, therapy, things like that. And you know what? I came out of that about, I'd say 2.5 years in, and I went, holy crap, I can't do this. So I need a blend of it. What I ended up coming out with was, I think that, the human stuff where we're only capable, I'm not picking on therapists, but I am saying traditional models of medical intervention, medical support, things like that. It has its place, but I ended up, doing a hybrid of, no, I need you, angels, and I need this divine, and I need to trust in all of these things to make this human experience not just more bearable, but that I can fully accept it as this has been part of my life, and I really want to honor that. And I'm going to work with embracing that, but not let it tear me down. When COVID hit, it forced you to be with yourself. So what did you do next to look at what was going on with you?
Part of it was, I don't even know if I was even looking at what was going on with me yet. I think I was just, my physical body was going, yes, I need attention. I was having really, really bad headaches that were stopping me from doing things because they had just gotten to a point where never considered them a migraine, but they were pretty intense. So starting to address that and figuring out, okay, what's going on? What's, going to see, different kinds of doctors to help me along that journey. I have, and I still do work with a kinesiologist that's helped me tremendously.
It's so interesting as I'm listening to you that you had headaches and your son had a brain tumor.
I know. I've thought about that myself often.
Without going into too much detail, it's very, very interesting when we develop physical symptoms that doctors can't diagnose. We might be able to treat them with different things, but there's no explanation where it's coming from. Are you familiar with Louise Hayes's book, You Can Heal Your Life? Right. So in that one, for anybody interested, and she wrote that, she's no longer with us, but decades ago, and she released different edits of it. But You Can Heal Your Life correlates what's going on in the physical to what can be going on, spiritually for you. It's a really cool book for anybody that might be interested.
Yes, it is. I haven't opened it in a while, but I always go to it.
It's in my little library, and yeah, for sure. So it's just to say, You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, and it has withstood the time. And so it can help us kind of go, okay, that's going on with me, maybe mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There's a definite correlation in our bodies to what's going on mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So how did things switch for you in COVID? Is that when you started the writing of your first anthology series?
Yes. So I started my first one late, I think it was November of 21. That book was published the next year of 22. And then my second book started this January and was released. And then the one that I've worked with, the Breast Cancer Resource Foundation, it was just released.
Wow. Very busy lady. So I want to turn to inspiration and motivation a little bit here. I think we always need some kind of inspiration in the early days, hope, something like you and I hung on to and we talked about earlier. Would you say most of those stories were inspiring, that people found something to keep them moving forward?
Yeah, and that was one of the missions of the book, was to provide hope and inspiration to the reader. Mm-hmm. So that was that it's not just about their grief journey, but how did they manage that grief? How were they able to, even if it was begin to heal, because I think it's a journey, it's a process.
Absolutely.
So at that point, how did they get there? How did they get there from the loss or even before the loss? Because sometimes there were caretakers prior to, or there was a story that went with it. It wasn't. And then there were others that were suicides or accidents where people were gone in an instant, although there's still a little bit of a backstory of how they got to that. And then how, as a grieving person or bereaved person, how they managed their grief, how they began to heal, steps that they took that other people may be able to use, that may, shine some light on their own healing process, maybe something that they hadn't thought of, and one of the authors, it just clicks for them.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yes, that's exactly. And on the other side of that, it's to help people feel like they're not alone. When you're grieving, you can feel like you're so alone and nobody understands you. That this book is meant to, or these books are really meant to help everyone involved. It helps the person that's doing the writing. Mm-hmm. because whether it's a year, whether it's 30 years, more healing's going to take place.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that, because there's no one way to heal, and things sneak up on you. It's really easy to go down that rabbit hole again. I'm a big believer in, at every stage, every year that passes, wherever we are, the longer we're in this. And, I have found, and when I was new to bereavement, I read these books and people had been in it 15 years and whatever. And I was just like, oh God, please no. Like, I know I have this ahead of me, but no, that sounds too long, right? And I wanted someone to tell me, 15 years in, the books I had my hands on in 2005, there weren't that many, and nobody had the answers. But some of the things that were in, commonly shared was, and I'm talking bereaved parents here, was that the grief can sneak up on you at any time. It doesn't last as long and it isn't as intense, but it's still there. And the other thing was just that, throughout a period, and certainly in the early years, they commonly said, it's like you take one step forward, 10 back. And that left me. But I also met people, Susan, who did nothing with their healing, nothing with their grief.
Right.
20 years in support groups and stuff like that. And so I'm just going to say, having those people, bless their hearts, literally, I didn't want that. Seeing that, like how that could ruin me, I didn't want that. So, just the pain, the pain, what we look like in the first little bit.
Right.
And so what inspired you to choose, nope, I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm not going to do it.
I think in the last few years really is when I think a lot of my healing has taken place, and it was just, I don't want to live like this anymore. I knew that he wouldn't want me to. I wanted to live my life, and I questioned so many times, like, okay, what is it all about? Why am I here? That
Yes.
age-old question.
Yes.
Why am I here? And I finally feel like the first time in my life, I'm living my purpose. I'm able to help other people. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy working with all these authors. I've worked with 44 authors up to now. And it is truly an honor and a privilege to work with them, because there's things in their story that they have never shared with anyone.
Yeah.
And my eyes are the first eyes that will see it after theirs. That's what drives me is like, okay, I found something, and I just keep listening to, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
Like that first book came out and I'm like, okay, let's do another one.
Yeah.
Okay, now this organization is contacting me to do work with them. Okay, let's go and do that. So I'm following the breadcrumbs. I'm not like forcing anything to happen. I'm allowing it to unfold as I am ready.
Yeah.
Because I know if too much was thrown on me at once, I'd get back in that rat race, so to speak, of going at full speed ahead. And that's not the way I want to live my life.
Well, you reached that point long before I did, so kudos. One of the things that might have taken me a while, though, and again, I'm going to say this really respectfully, is because I was still raising a son, and I had all of myself for years and years and years. It was I didn't have the space to give just to me until I made that decision to do that. Basically, I think it was about maybe a year and a half ago. And so again, for the audience, I'm going to acknowledge anybody here who still has their energy tied up in something else or someone else, and you are grieving. When you give yourself permission and all the circumstances line up for you to do this, Like you're not running off to a job, you're not surviving and putting out fires and you, if when you reach that point in your life that you can make room for you to care for you, that is the game changer. And so I'm glad that you were able to do that early on.
I was pushed.
I know.
Okay, this is this is your future. This is what you're meant to do, and I did push it away for a while because like I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And then finally it was like, okay, let's just now or never. Let's just jump off that cliff and know that I'll be supported in it.
Yeah, and that's so amazing. So the one thing I just want to say here is we're getting to the top of the hour, and I'm going to talk about next who you work with and then your resources. But I just want to say really quickly, you said something super important. Two things. One, step by step. We all know that, but please remember that, audience. And then the other piece that you're saying is let the universe deliver to us, the angels in my case, universe, whatever. But what they know, like for me, it's the angels bring me what I need, because what we sometimes can envision, especially as people who are go-getters and things like that. And for many years, my personality was changed after Janaea died. But there were still, when bits of the old me crept in a few years ago, it was that driven A+ personality. And while I've never regained that entire personality ever. There are bits, and when it started to kind of appear, I was like, what? And I didn't really know how to channel that because I also didn't have the same energy and drive anymore, like to be that person. So I didn't want to be that person. That's like, who do you want to be when you grow up? And so it's allowing these opportunities to just come to us and recognizing them as an opportunity and then deciding if you want to jump on it. Right, Susan?
Right. Yes. Absolutely.
Great.
What do you feel like, just for people who may not, well, I don't know. How would I know? Like, it just feels right. And you feel like, I might be a bit nervous and scared, but I have room in my life and I think I can do this. And even though I'm scared, I'm going to try it. Is that sort of your approach?
If I'm excited and I'm afraid of something, that's the perfect indicator that you're meant to do it.
Yeah.
And what's the worst that can happen? Nothing. Right? You try again. I read recently, failure is just something being reflected back to you. And I love that. All right. So right now, Susan, who are you working with? We're going to talk a little bit about writing as a healing modality. Are you working with people just as a way of like coaching?
I do one-on-one coaching, and I use writing as a modality I have an intensive 6-week program that I work one-on-one. I'm also starting my next volume of Shining a Light on Grief in January. So I am looking for authors for that. So people that have maybe thought about, writing a book where that feels so overwhelming, and they think that their story of grief and healing can help other people. And then on the third thing is I work with organizations to help them and their families, communities achieve the same, because there are a lot of these larger nonprofits have so much programming that they offer their families, and this is one of them. So I'm looking at, possibly working with some other cancer resource foundations that would like to repeat that same, because it has been unbelievably beneficial to those who participate.
Yeah. It's just, there's nothing like a great book to read someone's story or an anthology of stories to just in your own private little space. That is a community, people. And larger ones are, of course, online, looking for in-person support. Not everybody wants to go to support groups, but if you're in grief about something in your life, check online just to see, because you never know where the online support is going to lead you, including something that's, I recently discovered anticipated grief when you're going to lose a loved one. It's to be able to recognize in someone else's story, or sometimes in the case of an actual professional setting, clinics and so on, recognize, in yourself something that they've seen or can help you with because they've been through it, or it's their job to look for these things. And just don't try and do it alone. And not one of us is an island, are we?
No, we're not. We need community.
Yeah. So, Susan, anybody that's interested in contributing to your Volume 3 anthology, Shining a Light on Grief, is there a way to contact you directly, or do you have like an email on your site?
I do. There's a contact form on my site. You can go to shiningalightongrief.com, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with anybody who is interested.
Oh, that's amazing. And I really do want to just talk for a couple minutes about writing as a healing modality. What are your feelings about someone who might be interested but doesn't know how to get started, like journaling or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can start journaling, or even when authors start writing their story. The thing is to start. Just start writing. Think of a memory. Think of one point in that. It could be at the beginning. It could be who knows. It might be when somebody was diagnosed. It could be just start writing and getting out the details of what that story is.
When you actually write physically, not even typing, but physically, it is much more cathartic than any other form, like getting that energy out and on paper, that you've actually taken the time just to jot a few notes. So anyway, if they want to learn more, they can also contact you on your website,
shiningalightongrief.com.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to have a link to that below. So again, folks, you can contact Susan for information about if you want to be a burgeoning, wonderful, international bestseller writer, contributor to an anthology. You can contact Susan about potential coaching. So I think that you are a wonderful, wonderful gift to the planet, Susan. And I am just so happy that we met. I thank you so, so much for sharing your story. You are probably a wealth of comfort and inspiration to anybody who has lost their only child. Again, I want to be really respectful about that, because that is a different situation, I think, in grief. And I think there's things that we need to recognize in our losses, that although in the umbrella, okay, it's similar, but then there's different things that are different for us. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because if you are in the same situation as Susan and other parents who have lost their only child, Susan has experience with that, and to be a leader in what you do, and driven, and helping so many people, like with what you're doing. You didn't just sit there in that. You said, no, I'm going to change. I mean, this is just like a gift to other parents who need to be inspired and know that you can get through this. So I do thank you, and I recognize that in you, and honor in that in you, and thank you for your contribution to the world of bereavement. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Anyway, any last things you want to leave the audience with, Susan?
Find something that works for you, because we're all different.
Yeah.
Exactly. All different. Find something. Find something that you can hold on to. Find something that will help you heal. There's a lot of different things out there that you can do or participate in, or find groups, find other people that you can be part of community with, because I think that's the most important.
I agree. And I just want to say kombucha is a wonderful wine substitute. I make my own kombucha, and I wasn't, drinking too much wine myself or anything, but I recognized that, easy to do. And I tossed it and started making my own kombucha almost 2 years ago. And great substitute, folks. All right, Susan. Well, I'm gonna close this one off. So again, it's wonderful to have met you. Really wonderful.
You as well. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.